If Iran really killed 220 American soldiers in a single day, then this is one of the most important military events of the century. But that number is not the real story. The real story is that Washington did not respond the way a superpower normally responds when an enemy makes a wild casualty claim. It did not come out instantly, cleanly, and aggressively and say the number is false. It did not produce a reassuring counter number. It did not try to slam the door shut in public. Instead, it chose ambiguity. And then it moved one of the most sensitive aircraft in the American arsenal, the E-6B Mercury, into view. That is the part that matters. Because once a government refuses a direct denial and follows that refusal with a nuclear command and control signal, you are no longer looking at normal propaganda management. You are looking at a system that believes the confrontation has moved into a more dangerous phase. That does not mean Iran's number is true. It means the event underneath the number was serious enough that Washington treated escalation management as more urgent than narrative control. That is a very different category of crisis. The easiest mistake here is to get hypnotized by the number 220. That is exactly what television would do, put the number on the screen. Debate whether it is true. Bring on two former officials. One says Iran is lying. The other says we do not know yet. Then everybody goes home feeling informed, but the number is only bait. The deeper question is this. What kind of event makes the Pentagon choose silence over certainty and deterrence over transparency? That is the question worth following. Iran understands something that a lot of people in Washington still refuse to admit. In modern conflict, you do not always need a clean battlefield victory to change the strategic picture. Sometimes all you need is a credible enough shock, a number large enough to infect the information environment, and an American response serious enough to suggest that something inside the system has gone wrong. That is how a weaker power creates leverage. It does not need to destroy the United States. It only needs to prove that the United States cannot control the pace, the narrative, or the cost of what comes next. That is why this incident matters, even if Iran exaggerated the casualties, because Iran's goal is not just to kill. Its goal is to move the confrontation from the old script into a new script. The old script was familiar: proxy strike, America retaliates, Iran denies direct responsibility, markets shake for a day, then the whole machine settles back into managed hostility. This is different. A direct mass casualty claim, followed by American operational ambiguity, followed by the visible movement of a Takamo aircraft, tells every capital in the world that the system is no longer comfortably sitting inside the proxy box. It is leaning against the wall of state-level deterrence. And that is why this is dangerous. The E-6B Mercury is not theater. It is not a random aircraft. It exists for one reason, to preserve nuclear command continuity if normal ground systems are degraded or destroyed. It belongs to the logic of survival after communications fail, after infrastructure is hit, after leaders are forced to think in second. Strike logic rather than ordinary crisis management. When you move that plane, you are telling adversaries that the ladder is taller than yesterday. You are also telling allies that you think somebody may keep climbing. That signal travels instantly. Tehran sees it, Moscow sees it, Beijing sees it. The Gulf monarchies see it, insurance markets see it, energy traders see it, and everyone starts recalculating not around what has already happened, but around what the Americans now appear to be preparing for. That is how escalation really works in the 21st century, not with one dramatic speech, not with a declaration of war, with selective silence, specialized deployments, and 1,000 private interpretations spreading through systems that move money, energy, weapons, and fear. Now step back and look at Iran's incentives. Why would Iran make a claim this large? Because the number does four jobs at once. First, it energizes the domestic audience. A regime that presents itself as the force that can bloody America in direct confrontation reinforces its own legitimacy. Second, it pressures Washington. If the number is false, the United States must decide how much truth to reveal in order to disprove it. If the number is partly true, the United States has an even worse problem. Third, it sends a message to Russia and China that Iran is not just a sanctioned state under pressure. It is an active strategic actor capable of imposing pain on America. Fourth, it injects uncertainty into every market connected to the Persian Gulf. That fourth point matters more than people think. The Strait of Hormuz is not just a line on a map. It is one of the pressure valves of the world economy. Roughly a fifth of global oil flows through that corridor. The moment traders conclude that the military confrontation is no longer symbolic, every price model starts to wobble, shipping premiums rise, energy costs rise, inflation risks return. Governments that thought they were managing domestic problems suddenly discover they are once again importing crisis from the Gulf. Iran knows this. It does not need to close Hormuz tomorrow to create that effect. It only needs to make the world believe that the route is entering a new danger band. This is where the information battle and the energy battle fuse together. A casualty claim is not only about casualties, it is about changing the probability map in everybody else's head. And once those probabilities move, even before the shooting intensifies, the economic damage begins. That is one reason Washington's guarded language matters so much. If the Pentagon had immediately crushed the claim, markets would have interpreted that as control. Instead, the carefully hedged wording created a vacuum. And vacuums in crisis are rarely empty for long. They fill with worst-case assumptions. Then the E6B appears. At that point, the market, the diplomatic corps, and every military planner in the region start asking the same question. What did the United States just see that forced it to jump straight to high-order signaling? That question does not need a public answer to cause real-world consequences. Now add the regional architecture. Iran does not fight alone in the narrow sense. It operates through what it has spent years building, a network pressure system stretching across Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Yemen, and the maritime approaches around the Gulf and the Red Sea. The point of that system is not simply to launch rockets or drones. The point is to create multiple pressure points so that America can never respond in only one place. That is the structural advantage Iran is trying to exploit. If Washington focuses on one strike, another route becomes vulnerable. If Washington protects one base, another convoy becomes exposed. If Washington hardens one theater, oil markets start pricing risk into another. This is why a casualty shock matters beyond the battlefield itself. It creates the perception that Iran and its aligned networks can still generate concentrated pain despite American technology, American naval power, and American surveillance. And perception and deterrence is not a side issue. It is the core issue. If your enemy begins to believe you cannot protect your own people without escalating to the highest signaling tier, then the balance has already shifted. That does not mean America is weak. It means America may be discovering the limits of what overwhelming capability can do against a layered, decentralized, politically motivated opponent that does not need conventional victory. That has been the lesson of too many wars, and Washington keeps relearning it at extraordinary cost. There's another reason the American response feels so uneasy. Casualty management is no longer a sealed state function. In older wars, governments could control the pace of revelation. They could delay numbers, shape public understanding, and let official institutions define reality. That world is gone. Now, a foreign state can publish a number, social media can distribute it globally in minutes, analysts can compare aircraft movements in real time, families can begin asking questions before the government has even settled its own internal reporting, and adversaries can force Washington into a choice between secrecy and credibility. That is a brutal choice. Admit losses too early and you reveal operational weakness. Stay silent too long and you feed the suspicion that the truth is worse than the public story. Iran understands this trap very well. It is not merely fighting with missiles. It is fighting with time numbers, ambiguity, and attention. That is why the clean question, is 220 true, is actually too small. The bigger question is whether Iran has found a way to make the United States look strategically reactive even before the full facts are known. If the answer is yes, then the confrontation has entered a more dangerous stage regardless of the final casualty count. So what comes next? There are always three broad paths. The first is quiet de-escalation. Admirals move Oman. Qatar or another intermediary helps both sides lower the temperature. Public rhetoric stays hot, but the system chooses restraint. The second is controlled gray, zone escalation, more strikes, more claims, more denials, more signals, enough pressure to keep everyone nervous, not enough to trigger total war. The third is miscalculation. That is the path serious people fear most, because once both sides start using symbols associated with extreme deterrence, the margin for misreading shrinks. One side sends a message intended as caution. The other reads it as preparation. One side wants to stabilize. The other concludes the window is closing. Then the logic of send one more warning becomes the logic of move before they move. History is full of wars that began inside that gap. This is why the E6B matters so much. It is not proof that nuclear war is coming. It is proof that the Americans wanted everyone to think about the upper layers of the ladder. And once that thought is planted, the crisis is no longer local in meaning, even if it remains local in geography. The final point is the most important one. People will say this is just another Middle East flare-up, another cycle, another exchange, another loud claim that will fade. Maybe, but that is not what the signal suggests. The signal suggests that Iran is trying to prove that it can hit harder than Washington expected, and Washington is trying to prove that it can still dominate the ladder above conventional confrontation. That is not a normal exchange. That is a struggle over who gets to define the next phase. And if that is the real struggle, then the 220 figure is not the story. The story is that one side made a claim too large to ignore, and the other side answered not with reassurance, but with a machine built for the worst day imaginable. That is how, the confrontation has already moved deeper than the headline. The most dangerous moment in a crisis is not always when the explosions are largest. Sometimes it is when the language becomes careful, the numbers become uncertain, and the assets that appear in the sky tell you the people in charge are thinking about layers they do not want to explain in public. That is where the story is now. And that is why the real question is no longer whether Iran is bluffing. The real question is whether both sides have now entered a stage where bluff, warning, deterrence, and preparation are becoming too hard to distinguish. When that happens, crises do not stay manageable for very long.